So this is going to be a pretty complicated topic, and I could go into a lot of detail, but I kind of want to keep it really simple at first before we dive into anatomy and things like that. So what I want to talk about is trauma brain, and this can be very similar for people with CPTSD and PTSD, but also at the same time very different. So to start, trauma brain would be an unhealed brain from a traumatic experience, very simply put. And what happens when we're in a traumatic experience is that our brain starts to function at the level of survival, right? We go into that reptilian brain, the limbic area, and it's this fight or flight mode. So you have things like hypersensitivity. Everything is for like something you're okay, so you're fighting for your life when you're in this situation, and people respond to different situations in different ways. Like, you can run, you can freeze, and a lot of times in that traumatic experience, you get to overcome that, you get to process it, you get an end result, you get something that, you ran away, you got away, it ended in your brain, and now you can look back on it as a memory, and it doesn't cause these fight or flight reactions anymore. But what happens with things like PTSD or CPTSD is you never got that end. You didn't get out of the situation, you didn't overcome something, you didn't finally feel safe. So your brain stayed in that kind of reptilian fight or flight mode where you're on edge, and this can come out as being paranoid. It can be anger, it can be things like trouble with speech, being present in the moment because you're constantly on edge and looking around. And this is what trauma brain looks like. It's where you are stuck in this loop, because when you think back on the memory, you don't think back on it and it doesn't cause you stress. And this is a lot of times why cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't work that well with people with CPTSD and PTSD, because when they look back on it, it actually triggers the physical responses again, because you're reliving that moment. You're not looking back as something that happened that was resolved. It's something that is happening again, and you're living it again. So when you live in your trauma over long periods of time, it starts to affect everything. Your relationships, your behavior, but especially it affects your physical body. You know, it affects your appetite, your bowels, your sexual function, your you know, how you react to things. And living in this state constantly causes physical damage to every part of you, you know, not just mentally, but your organs, your function. So it can create a disease, like a disorder, not just disease, like dis-ease, discomfort, but it can lead to physical, real disabling disorders that appear that might have been dormant otherwise. So a little bit about why this happens, why it can create such physical effects, is that when you have an experience, there's one of two directions that it can go. And if you're wired in trauma brain, it goes to your amygdala, and it is processed as a threat, and then because it's processed as a threat, it sends out stress hormones. And when this is happening over and over and over again, with anything that's just as simple as like seeing a shadow and jumping and then realizing it's a shadow, you're releasing stress hormones in your body, and the circulation of these hormones causes a lot of physical symptoms over long periods of time. Now, in someone that doesn't have a trauma brain, instead of the experience going to that like reptilian area, it goes to the frontal lobe for more processing. You're able to think about it, and you look at the shadow, you know, you don't jump and you're like, it's a shadow, it's not a threat. So you don't have these stress hormones being released and circulating throughout your body. So the difference also between the trauma brain and the healed brain is that with the trauma brain, your gates are wide open. You know, everything can be perceived as a threat, and you have kind of this tunnel vision, and it can cause things like going numb. Dissociation is a big one. Like I said, speech problems, paralysis. And these are learned, and then there's coping mechanisms, right? Like self-destructive behavior and anger issues and projecting. And especially with CPTSD, this is a learned behavior from when, you know, your childhood, and you've repeated this behavior so many times that your brain just constantly lives in this trauma state. It's in a survival mode constantly. Some of the things that can cause it to worsen are, you know, being dismissed, being ignored, when what you're reaching for is being understood, it's a safety issue, right? Everything is this core, you know, root bottom line of feeling safe. And when you don't feel safe mentally, physically, spiritually, whatever, you aren't going to be able to overcome living in your trauma. Unhealthy ways that people living in their trauma deal with it are, like I said, self-destructive ways, numbing out, you know, going into fight or flight and being aggressive, and you know, also depersonalization, dissociation, just kind of blanking out, forgetting. Those are unhealthy ways. And you know, this is a video about trauma brain, and I can't go into a lot of the details on like how to heal, because that's going to be many videos. But you know, the most important thing is you will not be able to heal trauma brain until you feel safe. And how do you feel safe? What is safety? What is safe to you? There are a lot of ways to feel safe, to be around loved ones, or you know, physically safe, held, squeezed, and there's also ways that you can feel safe on your own, which is what I'm practicing and dealing with, because I don't have the other ones. A lot of that is also trauma, and creates a lot of unsafe feelings for me. So breathing, yoga, which I'll do a whole other video on, but feeling safe in my own body is a huge thing, because my body is very unpredictable, and the breath and in yoga and those practices really calms the central nervous system. And when I get into that state, it is when I feel safe. So, not the quickest, shortest video, like I wanted it to be, but that is a little bit about trauma brain. And yeah.